I'm getting out of the way and I'm just trying to get out of my own way to actually just listen or reflect or mirror. And it's going to be a completely different visit for every single person that walks in there.
I often get a vision of who they're being called to be and where they could be in 5 years, not based on projection, but based on possibility.
Reconnection of bringing us back to realizing that everybody walking down the street is likely feeling harsh judgment from the people around them, probably mostly themselves.
And people might say, that's very selfish use of someone else's death. No, as long as the intention is to create a space where people suffer less in the world, what better way to honor them?
On today's podcast, we had Phillip McKernan. This was a conversation I was really looking forward to having. It's got some layers to it. It's got some mood to it. It's a little bit heavy at times, but it's real. It's raw. I feel like some of those types of conversations are the most beautiful. They're the ones that I want to be in because it's true. There's no showcasing anything. There's just humans talking and connecting around things that are meaningful. And so I felt like it was a really rich and in-depth conversation. We both had some emotions at times, and there's a lot in here to reflect on for anybody that's taking this in and watching. Take your time with this one. Maybe carve out some space to listen to it. If you have some moments of reflection that may bring some things forward for you, some emotions, I welcome, thoughts and feedback around that. Please share how this lands for you, because in this podcast, we unpack being human a little bit. We share some of our own experiences. And to me, that's the depth and beauty of being alive. We share from our hearts. I hope it lands for everybody beautifully. And even if it doesn't, some of what we talk about in this episode is judgment. So I am human, and I do have a lot of judgment of self at times, and I feel that from others, and I'm getting to be more okay with it. So I trust that this lands for everybody in whatever way it needs to. Please enjoy the episode. Well, since we're recording, let's just get loosened up a little bit. It feels really tremendous to be here. And it feels like we've both been through a lot the last little while, and I have my, life and you have your life going on. And so I really appreciate you being here to carve out some time to have a conversation with me.
Absolutely.
And of all the people that I've met and that I know in my life, having a conversation with you is right at the top. And I can't even explain all the reasons I feel that way. And for those listening, I've got Phillip McKernan in front of me. And I said it yesterday, we just wrapped up an event that you were leading here in Toronto. And whenever I'm around you or I see you and walking into a room, I feel a lot of joy. And I don't always know why these things come up, but I can describe the feeling. And it makes me happy. And I smile, and there's Phillip. There he is. So if you want to introduce yourself or say anything, we'll just dive in. We don't need much preamble at all. And here we go.
I don't feel the need to introduce myself at all. I'm just here to serve. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm trying to remain as open as possible to whatever comes up and however we can serve any man or woman anywhere in the world who may or may not listen to this now or in the future.
Yeah. Well, we share a common goal, I think, in this podcast. We just want to be of service. That's why I'm doing a podcast. I kind of got tricked into it by my team, getting me to do a podcast, and suddenly I had one because I resisted it for quite a long time, actually. And I'm too busy. I got too many things on the go, and I'm really grateful to my team for putting enough things in place and structure and everything else so I could actually just kind of step into it without even really feeling like I was, and suddenly here this podcast is. And now I'm more excited about it. I would say that, oh, wait a minute, I'm going to be in Toronto hanging out with you and the other people in the group that we're in together. And why would I not want to have a conversation with you, especially? And I'm grateful just to face life in a new way. Each time I see you, I feel like a new person. It feels to me like you're a new person each time that happens. And, I got the pleasure to go to Ireland last year and be a part of an event that you have called Brave Soul. And that might be a jumping off point. Most of what you have has the word brave in front of it. And what I'm curious about is there's always a reason for everything you do, consciously, unconsciously. You're probably one of the most intuitive people I've ever met, whether you see yourself that way or not. Like, I know it. I can feel the things that you're tracking and moving through. And I don't know what your experience is, but it's an absolute delight and a learning experience watching you host and guide and help people get to something deeper. And I imagine with a brand like Brave Soul, Brave Leader, the other things that you run, and feel free to talk about any of them in whatever way you choose. But bravery comes around for everybody in different ways. And so I'd be really curious, you must have had to have a lot of bravery in your life. And please speak to that.
It feels like a big question and a very heavy question. And it brings up, interesting, a lot of sadness actually, because I think for the longest time in my own personal life, I didn't believe I was brave. I believed anyone and everyone was brave except for me. I remember in the early 80s watching a movie called Indiana Jones, which many of us are familiar with. And I don't know why and how, but it transformed my life in some respects. Now, this sounds a little cliche, but it was the first time I witnessed a person, a man, a human, albeit it was a character, but I didn't see the character. I didn't see the movie set. I just saw, holy shit, this guy exists. And it was the first time I saw something that actually inspired me from memory. And I remember thinking, this guy has it all. He's good looking. He's outgoing. He doesn't give a shit. And yet he cares about humanity at such a deep, fundamental level. And he gets to adventure, and he just is the epitome of courage. Now, again, that wasn't language I used at the time. But he, in some ways, he was the absolute opposite of who I was in that moment. The absolute opposite of who I was. So courage for me brings up a lot of sadness that I think a lot of us walk this earth, I know for me, certainly, feeling that we don't have either courage or enough courage to do what it is we're being called forth to do. And it wasn't a branding exercise in the context of a marketing exercise. It just felt, as we began very slowly and very awkwardly, as I began to move towards this work, dragged kicking and screaming, as I often say, the word brave just was, I can't even remember thinking of it. I don't remember sitting down and strategizing. It just came. It had to be part of the conversation, because I think the work itself brings that courage out of people into who they are, the decisions they need to make, and the things they need to let go of in order to become the person they're destined to become.
Absolutely. Well, and that word invokes a lot in me also, brave, and getting to know you and participate in some of the things that you offer. It just seems so natural. Of course it's called Brave Leader. Of course it's called Brave Soul. And one of the things that you said is that was the opposite, Indiana Jones as an archetype and those characteristics and things that I think a lot of us can identify with. And you said it was the opposite of who you were. Was it, I'm curious, the opposite of who you were, or more who you believed yourself to be at the time?
Who I believed myself to be at the time. I actually had immense courage, and I was demonstrating courage on a regular basis. I just didn't value it. And I often feel that, courage in society is dished out to those that actually are seen to be doing really, really great things as it relates to societal benchmarks and success.
Yeah.
But every single day I had to walk into a prison. It's sometimes referred to as school. And I had to face just the most horrific situation for me personally, where teachers were calling me stupid and lazy, where I was imprisoned in rooms that were obviously maybe slightly bigger than this room, but it felt like they were cells, being taught and force-fed information that I didn't need, I didn't want, and I was never going to fucking use, ever. And not one, I was thought about this very recently, that if I ever opened up a school, what would the classrooms be called? As I walk down the corridor, if I look to my left, I look to my right, what would I call the classrooms? One would be courage, one would be curiosity, one would be imagination, one would be just blank, it'd be empty. It would just be just go in and just see what comes. Another one would be spirituality, as opposed to, you know, a very defined religion that we were pushed into, etc. So just to exist in that environment, and I'll share one thing that is a little gross, but it just showed, I suppose, to give you a glimpse into where I was at that point. I remember one day, and I only had this memory about maybe 10 years ago. I just remembered it, and I was trying to deny it because it's kind of disgusting in many respects, but actually really sad in other ways. And as it relates to courage, also there's a sprinkle of courage mixed in with it. I remember sitting in class going absolutely insane. And I remember I couldn't look at the teacher because the teacher might look at me and ask me to read, and I couldn't read. I was dyslexic. And at that time, there was no way of understanding that. It was just, you're stupid and lazy.
Yeah.
And the other thing I didn't want to do was look at the ground because she might notice me. And the other thing is, I was trying to stay sane. I was trying to stay somewhat stimulated. So I remember counting the dandruff on the back of the kid in front of me. That's how absolutely nuts that period of time was for me. So now that I look back in hindsight, there was moments and periods of tremendous courage just to get through that shit. But I didn't recognize and I didn't see it like that.
Yeah. Well, and maybe a thread I'll pull on, and we can weave this however we want, but I experienced in my own way the belief I had in myself early on, childhood, teen years. If people knew what was going on inside, they would have been really worried about me. And so I see this time and time again in my own clinic and my own practice, because I've been there, I've felt that, and perhaps that is a resonating thread, because there's these aspects of how the fuck did we get such a big gap with how the world may perceive us or what's actually showing up. Like, you were incredibly courageous in many, many ways, but you didn't feel that way at the time. And there's this aspect of, you know, the people around us, society, teachers, family, whatever it might be, that don't always give very accurate reflection. And when I heard those words years ago together, accurate reflection, I remember thinking, like, what the hell is that? Oh, and then I started thinking about my own kids and the way that society and some of the programming overrides what's actually true for people. So if somebody falls down on their bike or something and they're really actually quite hurt, possibly, the instinct quite often is to run over there and say, you're okay, you're okay, you're okay. They are probably not okay. Maybe their knee is split open, they're bleeding, they're scared. Maybe that's the first major physical trauma, and the people around them possibly, and I'm not saying this is bad or wrong, I'm just stating things that I've seen and witnessed and behaviors I've had. You're okay, you're okay. So those things are really curious to me, is where do we start having the gaps? And it's often in the little things of, that's not a very accurate reflection of, hey, I'm here. Are you hurt? And they might say, fuck yes, I'm hurt. And it's like, okay, I'm here, without overriding, telling them, no, you're okay. Because if you're okay, I'm okay. Yeah. And so I'm curious in your thoughts of doing work with people at really deep levels and retreats and trips and things like that. What would your take be on that? How do we end up with such a gap, even as adults, especially? Because for a lot of adults, that is still there. They may still not have accurate reflection. And actually, I'll just keep going for a moment. What I've seen with you working with people, you give them such a pure and profound, accurate reflection. And it may not be something they want to hear, or it might be something they've needed to hear for 20 or 30 fucking years that nobody else could give them. But that love and that intuition that comes through feels so clean to me with your work, which is why I'm drawn to it. Because I don't feel that way with everybody. I don't feel that way with leaders. And maybe I'm sensing how far they have a gap in what they say versus actually how they feel. Whereas you are brave, and I believe you feel brave, and it actually makes me feel brave. So if I come back around to that, yeah, how do you see that gap and why that gap forms, either with your own experience or what you see with others?
Yeah, I suppose I've never thought about this at this level, in the sense, like, what's the work all about? The work is all about getting people to ground zero as it relates to exactly how they feel, like the truth, not the bullshit. I even have a little kind of spoken or unspoken rule at events. If someone does start to tear up and get emotional, I ask people not to run to the Kleenex, to grab the Kleenex, to run to the person, which on the surface of us is quite a nice thing to do. It's quite gracious. It's generous, but in reality, it's also mopping up their own uncomfortableness by throwing the tissues at them and getting them to mop up their tears and get their shit together, so to speak.
Yeah.
I think we move. I think the greatest pandemic in the world right now is people just living in their heads and not feeling, and I think that's the greatest gap I see. And when we start to get in touch with what we feel and how misaligned we often feel in life. Because a lot of us, I think at any particular point in any juncture, there's some misalignment in our life. And we've become so used to it and it's been so normalized, we don't even realize the cost. The cost is when you stop and you can really ask yourself a better set of questions to understand that you are out of alignment. How does that feel? And what is the impact? And what are you depriving yourself and therefore society and people around you of because you're so misaligned? But again, we're so reluctant to feel. So the gap for me is the gap between the stories we tell ourselves, the expectations that have been placed upon us from either others or ourselves, and a felt sense. And I'll give you a quick example. I was invited to do a workshop for a group of entrepreneurs. And the man who invited me, beautiful human being, great guy, great intention, brought me in. But he's a bit nervous because he knows that my work has a depth to it that perhaps some of these men and women haven't experienced. And as the workshop started to go, his business model is based on these men and women being members of his business, which helps them, amongst other things, scale their business. And it became very apparent that actually scaling their businesses was not going to give them the full lived experience of what it means to be human, essentially. And you could see him starting to get quite scarce as opposed to abundant with this. And he turned around and he said, but hang on a second. Surely, let's call him Trevor. Surely Trevor can create the kind of meaning you're talking about, where you're after not just allowing people to and create success, but also the satisfaction that can come with that if it's aligned. Surely Trevor can access that from his current business. Turns out Trevor's got this really successful business building medical devices that help people all over the world. I said, of course he can. But it all hinges on one question. And the guy goes, what is that? And I said, Trevor, can I ask you a question? He goes, yeah. I said, if this is all you do for the rest of your life, is that going to be enough? And with a kind of a profound, sobered, teared up face, he just went, no, not even close. And there's the gap between the perception of who this man is and therefore could be versus what he's feeling internally, which is that emotional landscape, which is an indication of how far he is removed from his soul. And there to me is the big gap that I see all the time.
I can feel, as people listen to what you just said, in some cases, a huge amount of grief, massive insight of anybody hearing that is probably likely self-evaluating themselves right now as how big is my gap? And I see this in my medical practice all the time. I see it in society. And again, not from a place of judgment. And I could have some judgment in here. I'm human as well, where I've never seen more plastic surgery. And I'm not saying this to trigger anybody or judge anybody if you've had procedures and treatments, whatever that is, but that they're looking to close that gap. At least that's what I believe on how they actually feel about themselves inside. But it doesn't fill that gap. And in fact, I would venture that it makes it wider. Yeah. And I've had arguments with patients about this, loving arguments, because I see everything through a lens of health. I see the patterns, I see the things that are contributing to their health and vitality or their dis-ease or illness. And it's one or the other. They're either kind of growing and expanding, or there's a contraction happening. And in Chinese medicine, that term would blockage, qi, stagnation, energy isn't flowing properly. And those are the things I'm looking for, is what is happening in their life that is creating a disturbance there. And so you could have somebody that has $1 billion, but they have significant blockages in their system, energetically, physically, emotionally, mentally, any of those things. But the society would look at that possibly and judge them to be incredibly healthy and happy and fulfilled. And they might be, but they might not be. And even in relationships, some of my own lived experience where time became a measure of success. If you're together for longer, that's somehow more successful. But not everybody's looking at the quality of the relationship. How much does it serve the community? How much does it serve the family, the kids? And is there an expansion and vitality and zest for life? Or do they feel like they're in prison, like you in school, but we're together and we're here? Or that person, I got the degree, I got the check boxes, I got the certifications. Now what? Maybe still miserable. So I can't help it, but I see gaps everywhere. Mainly, I think, because I saw many gaps in myself that I really needed to face, but I really didn't want to.
Yeah.
And you named something really important, I think, is being able to actually look at that there might be a gap is a pretty big step for people. And I think in my past experiences, I knew there was pretty big gaps in my life, in my systems of operation, how I'd interact with people. And I did not want to look at that for the life of me.
Yeah, see, that's the key. I did not want to look at that for the life of me. And if I had to distill where I think courage plays its greatest role, it is our greatest ally, and where we can distribute it the best, it's not in the action. It's not in creating a new electric car that's going to change the way we drive, and therefore, transportation and whether it affects the climate or not, leave that argument aside. But that's the outcome. The courage is to stop and ask yourself very simple questions. Why am I doing this? Why am I getting plastic surgery? And then you go, well, why am I really getting plastic surgery? And what gap, if any, am I trying to fill? And I think having the courage to stop and ask yourself really simple questions about the place you inhabit, the work you do, the relationship with yourself, and the quality of the relationships around you is one of the most courageous things any man or human can do, as long as they give themselves time to answer it truthfully. And I remember, I've hundreds of examples of this particular thing, but I'll give you one. And I remember years ago, this lady, and she was kind of, I would respectfully say rambling about something to kind of in some ways keep herself and me off, kind of the scent of where she's misaligned.
A little smoke screen coming up, yeah.
Exactly. And I just looked at her, and I think she was talking about business or something. And sometimes when people are talking about family, I'll bring them to business and vice versa. And I just looked at her and I said, how's your relationship with your kids? And she stopped and said, what? I was talking about business. I said, yeah, I get it. But what's your relationship like with your kids? She said, it's incredible. And I said, cool. I said, how do you know? And she goes, well, they're my kids. It's my life. And I said, on a scale of 1 to 10, she goes, I'd say 9.5. And I said, so there's little or no room for improvement. She goes, oh, no. I mean, there's always room for growth. I said, well, no, there's not. There's actually not. Based on what you just assessed, there's almost no room for growth. And then I said, describe them to me. Let's get into it, if you're willing. And she said, well, Sean and myself, we used to be closer, and Sarah's going through her own stuff, and she's definitely a little bit more angry and whatever. And then let's just call it Henry. Myself and Henry are just the closest ever, and we're even closer now than we were. So it was a bit of a mix. And I said, so is it fair to say that it's not a 9.5 across the board? And then the sadness came. The anger came first at my arrogance of questioning her life, right? And the sadness started to emerge of the reality of her life. And the reason that she was assessing herself as a 9.5 and not recognizing the gap is because she didn't want to feel the sadness. Now, I don't want her to feel the sadness, Kevin. I don't get joy when people feel the sadness, but when they feel the sadness, then they feel the reality. Then they know exactly what the gap is. And here's the lovely thing. There is little or nothing that can be done when you're at a 9.5 in anything in life, at a 10. But if you recognize that the real figure is a 6 or a 4 or 2 or whatever it happens to be, then you can actually roll up your sleeves and say, okay, so how can I influence this? Not control it, but how can I influence this? Where can I start? And then suddenly the answers start to come. They go, well, actually, in reality, I've been avoiding it. I don't spend much time. I haven't had a conversation. I wonder if I want him to be vulnerable. I wonder if I went first, what would that look like? Without any expectation of receiving that and that being reciprocated back to me. And suddenly this lady had this opportunity, this runway, but she looked as if she was dead.
Yeah.
She looked as if I just told her 3 kids were killed in a car crash. Where in reality, the opposite of that is, oh shit, I feel guilty. I have some shame. I'm not proud of myself. But oh my God, I'm only 40 and I know this now, or I'm only 50, whatever age she was. You mean I've got a window here of 20, 30 years to continue to work on this? I think we should be applauding when we realize the truth is a 6, because then we got something to work on. Yeah. As opposed to saying, no, it's a 9.5 and we're done. That's the biggest gap I see, particularly in a relationship. And we're all in relationship to everything. We're in relationship to work. I see that as a big disparity, a big gap between, who we are and the work we do in the world. And somebody asked me recently, how would you define work? And for me, work is the place we get to show the world who we really are. We don't have to do that, but it's a place we have an opportunity in order to do that. Yeah. And I think we feel as humans, we can do disconnected work, and that's okay. And I disagree. I don't think it's okay.
Yeah. Well, and that's the sense that I've had for many years, that we can't compartmentalize anything. We think we can. I thought I could. Oh, this area of my life is good. This is good. This is good. This other thing, maybe I'm at a 6. I feel like the other ones are 8 or 9. That's okay. I should be grateful. Who am I to want more? Who am I to not be satisfied and grateful for what I do have? But that was a way for me to bypass and not be willing to look at the reality that, oh, actually that's a 2. And I'm going to just stay focused on the 8s and the 9s that I got going over here, because I didn't want to accurately reflect that back to myself. And I hadn't developed enough bravery or courage to step into that. It took time. I did eventually. And this is what I would say, even going back to the, using plastic surgery as a comment. It's not to disparage anybody and their goals and dreams and everything else, but I personally love seeing wrinkles on people's faces. Grief lines, sadness lines, happy lines, sun lines, whatever the different lines are in the wrinkles. And somehow we've gotten to a society that wrinkles are bad somehow, or looking like you have some experience or some gray hair is not good. And I feel like for any of the gray that's in my beard and my hair, I'm like, I earned all of those through lived experience. And I'm grateful for those experiences, because it's made me a better person, a better father, a better practitioner, somebody that can show up with other people. If I hadn't had any of those experiences, what level of service could I offer? I hadn't been, either choosing or sort of feel like forced sometimes to be courageous, but then you can find it. So some of the most beautiful things I've seen is look into an elderly man or woman's eyes and see that fire and enthusiasm for life, and their face might be completely wrinkled and they might be 90. It is so beautiful, because I can feel the depth of the wisdom or the experiences that they've had. And I want to know their story. I want to know, where did you come from and how have you arrived at this place? There must be some stories to share there. And I feel like that depth of soul, and usually, not always, but often by that age, they're possibly quite connected, because they've learned all the things we talk about, and they did the thing, and they bought a jet, or they did all that stuff, and maybe that was happy for them, or maybe it wasn't, or they've started to look at their relationships in a different way. And I've also seen in cases where they haven't. And sometimes I've felt really challenged in my own work to possibly throw a wrench into somebody's life out of what I believe is coming from a loving place, that there's a huge gap still, but they might be 70 or 80. And it's not easy to be the one to point it out to them. And I don't want to often. And I can kind of sense that with you sometimes, that it can be really hard. And you and I have talked about this before. Sometimes this work is pretty lonely. And I'd be curious for you to maybe speak on that or share about that. If you still feel that way now, do you feel aspects of loneliness in the work, or has that maybe changed or transformed? And what might be some of the lonely things? Because it's easy for people to look into the outside looking in of like, man, I want to be like Phillip, and maybe that's a really good thing. And you do beautiful work, really profoundly beautiful work. And I'm saying that authentically. I'm really inspired by the work that you do. I'm learning from you all the time. And I love that. And I can also, with my own experiences, like, it's not easy to hold that line with somebody, to show them a gap or reflect or mirror a gap for them. Especially one they haven't wanted to see for decades, possibly.
Yeah. I want to go back and share, if I may, a very quick story, because I think it speaks right into the whole wrinkles thing. And then I want to circle back to the question you just asked. And a very quick story. There's a lady called Donna. She's from British Columbia. And she shared this very profound story a number of years ago with me. One of the things she wanted quite badly, I would imagine, I don't think that's unfair to say, was a relationship, an intimate relationship to journey this earth with, essentially. I think her attachment to that relationship was probably a little bit too much, because the minute you have an over-attachment to any particular outcome, you're blinded by, on the peripheral, you don't see the whole picture. Anyway, she tells a story about being asked to go on a blind date, and she kind of said no, and her friends kind of pushed her into it, and she goes on this blind date, and she shows up, and in her words, not mine, she said, "I dolled myself up for the first time in years." And I think that's the term she used. It's certainly a term we use in Europe. In other words, she put on her makeup, she put on her best dress, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And she shows up at this restaurant and she meets this guy, and they very quickly establish that there's not really chemistry. How they did that, I don't know, so fast. But then they really maturely and brilliantly decided, hey, we're here now. Why don't we just have dinner? Well, the dating thing is gone, right? That's dead almost. They start to have dinner. And he or she asked the other person, so, well, what are you into? He goes, listen, no disrespect, I think you look beautiful. I love women who just kind of own who they are. They don't feel the need to wear a lot of makeup and whatever. And Donna's like, are you effing kidding me? She says, it's the first time I'm wearing makeup in 10 years or whatever, right? It's the first time I took out a dress. Normally I wear jeans and whatever. It turns out he's describing who she normally is, but not who she showed up to be that night. And in his own way, he was, I'm going to say, pretending. And not out of a malice place, not out of a disingenuous place, but out of a place of scarcity and expectation of what he should be and she should be in that moment. And I think it's such a great example that we end up becoming, we end up kind of altering who we are at our essence in order to achieve a result. And then we end up in a situation out of alignment because the way in which we got to there, we altered who we were.
Yeah.
So therefore, the thing itself is never going to work, even if it on the surface works. I have clients say to me, no, but I'm making millions. I go, yeah, but it's not working. They're going to go, but look at the numbers. And I go, no, it's not working for you. So it either will not work or it will not matter if it's out of alignment. But coming back to the question about loneliness, I think about 2 years ago, if you asked me this question, I would have felt a heaviness and a loneliness.
Yeah.
Whatever's happened, and I don't know if I can answer why or how, but in the last couple of years, there's an ownership, or actually more accurately, a lack of ownership around the work. So while some of the things you've said are really gracious, beautiful, and complimentary, it's not that they're not coming from a sincere place. They are. They just don't land as deeply in me anymore. Because what I've come to realize is that the work I do, like you just witnessed 2 days, 2 pretty intense days. And whatever happened in that room that I was directly involved in wasn't of me, it came through me. Now, this is maybe where I lose 95% of the people who are listening and they go, screw this, I'm out. But it's the truth. When I feel it's coming from Phillip, there's a lot more on the line. It's about me. If I get rejected, then I get rejected. And I shared that the other day where when I come at someone from a place of love and support, and I don't mean attack, I just mean present and mirror back to them. Historically, it would debilitate me when they rejected that because they were not just rejecting me, but they were rejecting me where I was coming from such a deep place of love and wantedness of growth for them. It's different now.
Yeah.
It's coming through me. I'm just a vessel. And I feel way less lonely in it. I feel actually connected to I can't believe I'm going to say this because I always, for years, and I used to judge the shit out of people, but connected to a source. And I'm not going to try to name what that source is, but I feel my co-facilitator is the table. My co-facilitator is the landscape in Ireland when we walk these 5,000-year-old roads. It used to be all about me. I was holding it together and I was the guru and I was the this and that. Now it's like, I'm just one little cog in this big wheel called life and nature and possibility. And therefore it's way less lonely in life.
Oh, that's really powerful. I I feel like I'm going through a similar shift. And it's interesting just feeling the differences in that, because in my own experience of feeling really lonely or disconnected, even in a room full of people, what I'm coming to learn is, and I shared this in the group as well during the last couple of days, that I am now more inhabiting me, which actually brings me back into connection. And it's now, whether there's people around, one person or 500 people, I feel really connected regardless, wherever I am, whatever I'm doing. And, in terms of the vessel, that's also something I would, parallel, that I would hang on to this in my own work for years in the clinic, that if I couldn't heal somebody or cure their illness, fail.
Yeah.
I wore it. I wore all of it. And, I could really see it's like, I needed that for me. I needed to be a healer. I needed to be a doctor that could cure illness and wear that and feel good about that and, solve whatever gaps I was feeling within myself. And I would completely take responsibility away from the patient, and I would do it. Because then it was me, and that was exhausting, led to burnout,
shattering,
didn't help outcomes at all, but it seemed like it did for a while. But then I started seeing people come back with the same things and not really have helped them solve what they needed. So the transformation of my own career is more on the wavelength of what you're speaking about, that I don't remember half the shit I say to people in a visit, and that usually is an indicator to me that I'm getting out of the way, and I'm just trying to get out of my own way to actually just listen or reflect or mirror. And it's going to be a completely different visit for every single person that walks in there. And in an ironic way, I feel way more connected. Whereas before I was convinced the other way. Oh, this is going to really connect me with this person, and they're going to be really enamored by what I'm doing and saying, and I've helped heal them. But it didn't have as much depth to it as what is surfacing now around the being a vessel for just listening.
100%.
What's showing up here. And what I'm curious about in this, because you mentioned earlier, you would judge the shit out of what you said earlier. And even what you said is, I'm going to probably lose 95% of the people here by saying this. What is it that you're speaking to in that moment? Why did you feel, or even if you're being sarcastic, that we'd lose people in this conversation, possibly with, taking it to that level of conversation?
It's a form of apologizing for what I believe and what I feel, and it's the Irish to some extent in me, and it's also a lack of ownership. It's still emerging for me. So as I said, loneliness 2 years ago, 24 months is not a lot of time. So it's a kind of an ownership. It's still that residual sense of being judged for so many years, and that being the default, just used to people judging the shit out of you all of the time. And I think that's just, I had that every day when I'd hand in, not to go back and make it all about school, but I'd hand in any type of writing, and the teachers just stopped marking it. They would just put an X and throw it back at me. And then the words, what they would say, and the pain of that. And honestly, it's still it's so present. It's just there all the time. And then there is a logical part of me that goes, they obviously were fucking miserable in their own lives. There was some gap for them that they felt they needed to destroy some young little kid who I was a good kid. I was a kind kid. I wasn't a bad kid in that regard. I just couldn't read and keep up in relation. So there's always this part of me, and that's that insecure part of me that, you're just afraid that people are going to judge you despite how much growth I have. And therefore I feel the need to qualify it, which is, I know, not the right thing to do, but it slips out. It's a form of defense. If I use a bit of humor, a bit of sarcasm, if I discount myself, that means you can't get to do that. I'm not going to give you that power. But the truth is that I am here for a reason. I know that, and I mean that it's so strong inside of me. I am I've been called to do this work, and there's a brilliance in the way in which the work comes through me. The brilliance is not necessarily Phillip McKernan.
Yeah.
And it also is a little frightening. And maybe that's why I discount it a bit, because I don't know what to do with this. It's like any gift that we have in the world. There's a burden, there's a heaviness, and there's a sense of responsibility.
Yeah.
And the other thing, actually, that's now that I'm sitting here talking about this is, and I felt the need to qualify this as well, but I'm not going to qualify this, is I've met tons of speakers. I've met tons of gurus. I've met tons of writers and everything else. And the amount of them that stand on stage and share one thing and get off stage and live a completely different life is staggering. And it is okay to stand on stage and say, here's the 5 ways you should live your life. That's okay. But I do think they have a moral responsibility to say, oh, by the way, I don't live them. I'm just here teaching them. But don't stand there and teach people the 5 steps of life or whatever they are teaching. Imply that you're doing it, or explicitly explain that you're doing it. Walk off stage and go and live a completely different life. You've no right to lead people down that path, like none whatsoever. And I think if there's one fear I have that just trumps every other fear, is that might happen to me someday. That might happen to me because, you know, you in society, we cannot, we almost like we have so little respect for ourselves. We have to find people around us and put them on pedestals. And the minute we put somebody on a pedestal, whether it's an inch high or a mile high, we're not saying we respect them, we like them, we think they're great. We're saying, I'm not as good as them. That's all we're doing. And we're so desperate to do this in society that many years ago, not that many years ago, maybe 20, 30 years ago, we ran into restaurants, we ran into kitchens, and we grabbed chefs and we pulled them out and said, we're going to make you famous. We're going to put you on television, and we're going to amplify who you are. Then we're going to do this with mechanics, and we're going to do this with this and that. And we just have this obsession by pushing people up. And for those watching the video, the way I see it is we're all equal. And the minute I get pushed up, the minute anyone gets pushed up, what happens is society's doing it to us, and then we allow it. And the ego is a very fragile thing.
Yeah.
So when people come up to me and say, hey, can I do selfies? Can I do this? Can I get your autograph? Whatever it happens to be. It's your ego wants, like a drug. And the more insecure and the less work you've done on yourself, the more it wants it, because it actually it feeds something that has never been fed before. But it's not sustainable. And you get pushed up, you get pushed up, you get pushed up, you get pushed up, and you get to the top of that pyramid. And when you eventually get to there, whatever time that takes, and you look right, you look left, you're on your own because you can't see anybody beside you. You have become something that you are not, and you think you're above everybody else. Mm-hmm. And from the top of that pyramid down, there's only one way down. And it can be, the quicker you discover it, the less of a bumpy ride it is.
Yeah.
But it can be one hell of a ride all the way down that. And it always comes to happen. And another thing, I'm almost certain you get this. I'm almost certain that I bet any money you want that you'll resonate with this, is I can predict the future. And what I mean by that is I can't predict the future in maybe a way that we might think about it in the sense of a movie or going into a time machine or whatever. But I can meet people, and I essentially can tell, based on the misalignments and the alignments in their life, where they're going to be in 5 or 10 years. I can almost draw it to the nearest point, like the nearest dot or the T and whatever. Like I can see it. And Pauline, my wife, has said it's remarkable. She said, you can just name people, the refusal to do the work, the level in which they're doing the work, and so on and so forth. And I can literally predict where and I could also, on the other side, when I meet someone who's really gifted, I often get a vision of who they're being called to be and where they could be in 5 years, not based on projection, but based on possibility. Mm-hmm. And while that is weirdly beautiful, it also feels like a gift that I've been given that I'm not sure I entirely want.
Yeah. I think this is the fascinating thing about gifting, is it shows up for different reasons in different ways for all of us. And what we choose to do with that is quite a profound thing or choice. And I do resonate with what you are sharing, both in what I'm understanding you saying and what you sense and perceive with a set of skills and tools to see and discern patterns and have a predictive course that without a course correction there's like a fairly, ingrained set of directions that are going to happen here or close.
Yeah.
And so when you work with people, that sense or that feeling, the patterns you're taking in, a million different things maybe, and it probably happens so quickly, it's not always a logical thing. Is that generally then what you will speak to with that person, and mirror that and create a shift? Because there's a real pragmatic way that you work, or at least that's my view of it, that it's meant to be really effective, because why else would we be here to do, what else are we going to do?
I guess for the people who step into the work with me, I hold the possibility of what it is they're being called forth to become, like the essence of who they are, and that the essence of who they are is reflective in their life, that actually they're aligned in their relationships where they live and so on and so forth. So I kind of hold that as a vision for them, but again, without projecting what I think they should do or be and whatever like that. And that actually, I think, acts as a guide, but it's very intuitive to the point where I can't recall it. I can't, it's not like a file, it's just there, it's kind of floating. And everything goes through that lens.
Yeah.
Everything. So they'll be looking at me talking one thing, I'll say, how's your relationship with your kids? And they go, what we weren't even talking about that. And I go, yeah, because that does not fit. What you're talking about does not fit who you are. So now that I'm sitting here, because I don't reflect upon this a lot, I think just it acts as a consistent, continuous filter in which I challenge them and I support them through all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. And it's like the purest, what's the purest expression of that person? That's what I'm really after. What is the purest expression? And for most people, they cannot see that. They don't know what that is for them, because what they do is they think about their future of their life, and they base the future of their life in the historic data that they currently have, which is basically who they've been, where they've been, who they've met, who they've been with, what they've done, what's worked, what hasn't worked. And they bring all that baggage with them. And they go, now with all this, how can I become that? And I go, no. Fuck all that shit that you've been through. Leave it aside for a moment. It has influenced who you are on so many levels, both brilliant, beautiful, and dysfunctional. And a different way of saying it is, I often find people who, they've been running. Most of us actually are running from what it is we don't want. That's actually really probably more accurate. We're running from poverty, we're running from fear, we're running from aloneness, we're running from failure, we're running from whatever. And we're trying so hard to correct that. And it is exhausting. And to stop, and I think that's probably the thing I do probably the best, is to create the space for people to stop and to wonder what it is. Can you leave that down, even temporarily? Can you leave that fear down, that insatiable need to move away? Stop, feel the fear, feel the energy, feel everything that you've been running from temporarily, so that you can get just beyond that to begin to reimagine what's possible for you from a place of abundance and possibility and love, not fear, guilt, and anger. And that is, when I witness that, when I get the privilege to sit in a room and watch that unfold, there is no money you could pay me on earth, no money whatsoever, to leave that room in that moment. That's the magic.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything that you're running from right now?
I was sitting here earlier on. This lovely gentleman over here was setting up the cameras, and I'm feeling a little nervous, and there's lights and there's microphones, and there's a kind of formality of it. There's a kind of a fixed sense of it. And then you open up about your team kind of put you under pressure to do a podcast. I'm thinking, fuck this. This is like, I'm not here for a lesson. I'm not here to be coached. I'm exhausted. I've just run multiple events. But honestly, what came up for me is, I know this is what I need to be doing. I need to be running a podcast. There's a book inside of me I've been hiding from, running from, justifying I'm busy from. And of course, that's the surface. What lies below that for me? And I think to some extent, I don't know. I'm not the best person placed to see that. I think I'm still running from myself a little bit. I'm still running a little bit from myself, the gifts that I've been given, because for many years I've seen them as a burden.
Yeah.
I've seen them as a burden. And that is changing. And as I see that changing, it becomes less burdensome. I care less what people think about it. And I'm ready to bring those gifts in a more amplified way to the world. And actually, I don't believe I would get lost in it. Mm-hmm. The fear of getting lost in it and becoming lost in it and being at the top of that pyramid, I think I'm willing to run the risk of that happening. And I think I have enough good people around me that they'll let me know, you included. But I'm depriving the world of something. And that is a different kind of heaviness to it. So I think I'm hiding from what's trying to come through me and what I'm here to do at a different level, and definitely a more amplified level.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and I really want to honor what you just said. And, for anybody that's listening and not watching the video, I've got some emotion around some of this, and I can feel it and see it in you. And that, first of all, for, any men, any masculine out there that, I'm feeling all kinds of feelings right now, and I'm okay with that. Mm-hmm. And, the fear of judgment that I felt so strongly in the past, and you've alluded to that, the schools, the words, the judgments of other people that can stay with them for a lifetime and might have been fairly offhand and just in a moment. We don't always know the impact that we have on people, both positive and negative. And whenever I sense and feel that, and I think because, we're both parents, we both have teenagers right now, that some of what you're sharing really brought up emotion for me earlier too, around my son and being in school, and sort of some of the most gifted people that I'm aware of have these labels like dyslexia. We're really challenged in school systems and the way that it was set up. And my son had a lot of really significant vision issues really early on. And he was in glasses around 2.5 years old. And when we discovered that he couldn't fucking see, it broke me. We didn't know. He was so capable. But there was little cues and seeing things in it, with his eyes and how it was. And he got glasses, and I wasn't at the visit. I was at work, and his mom, my former wife, she had taken him to the eye doc, and he said, he's pretty much legally blind in the one eye. And when she told me that, it was so hard to be like, what are you talking about? He can't see us. Really. And he got glasses, and he came home, and he's feeling the carpet, and he's like, look at all the strings in the carpet. He couldn't see them. Or we'd be out for walks, and he'd see the leaves. It's like, look, there's lines in the leaves. And for the first few years of his life, like, he couldn't see that. He was taking in the world completely different. And, I definitely felt some guilt around that in different ways at times. How come we didn't pick it up earlier or whatever? But I can also see the beauty in it. It brought me to a new lens in my own life of how I was seeing things, and to see things through my children, to kind of bring it back, and the challenges he had with school because he couldn't see. And even with specialized glasses and different things, he's like, Dad, I can't see the board. And then his view became, I'm stupid. And he is so brilliant and intuitive and creative and just remarkable. Both my kids are. I'm so grateful. But his lens through which he was seeing himself, and still probably at times reminded me of me at that age too. And so this part that maybe we run from, at times it feels like we're getting right to the meat of that in some way.
You remind me of a story, actually. I've never shared this. I'm not even sure my wife knows this story. But I don't even understand dyslexia, and I don't understand the whole audio or visual stuff that can go on for people, but there was a teacher in the school that recognized something in me, and she asked my parents, could she test me? Don't remember the name of this. You might know the name of this, whether it's still around or not. But basically, it's using different colored lenses to allow the fuzziness and all the dancing words and letters and everything else to just be, kind of, still, if you like. And I remember bringing me into a classroom, and I remember giving me a yellow lens and a blue lens and a red lens and whatever. And I remember putting on one, and everything stopped. All the movement stopped. I could actually read.
How old were you at that time, do you think, if you had to
I'm
guess?
guessing about 13 or 14. And this memory is bizarre because it brings up a lot of shame for me as well. And the truth of it is that there was a particular lens that actually worked. But because it was so loud, I think it was red, or just from memory, I would have to wear these red glasses in school every day.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember putting them on, and everything just stopped. Like, I feel like my heart's like racing right now telling the story. And she said, are they working? Because she saw me react. And I said, no, they make it worse.
Yeah.
And I took it off. Because I couldn't bear being even more abnormal in the school and the class. I couldn't bear it. I couldn't bear the idea of having to go in with red sunglasses essentially at the age of 13 or 14. Now you'd kind of get away with it because it's a bit cooler, I think, with all these light blocking glasses and everything else. But I think that's the thing that probably permeated so much of my blockages and everything else, and unwillingness to experiment and try things. And that's probably going back to the very first question around bravery and why bravery is so important. That I was so consumed by what people thought of me that I was unwilling to step out, because judgment had such a profound effect on me. It pushed me down to some extent. I remember many years ago, I was in some resort somewhere, I can't remember. And I remember precisely sitting in this restaurant, and it was all in slow motion. And before I kind of heard a noise, I heard it play like a fork drop or something. And I just turned around, and I'm looking at a woman who's choking. She's just put something into her mouth. It's caught in her neck, and she's just choking, and she cannot move. And I froze in the moment, and the Heimlich maneuver, what we're meant to do, and go behind them. I think I was even somewhat familiar with that. I've actually subsequently ended up doing it with my wife, which was also bizarre. And I looked at this woman, and she was dying. And it felt like I was watching her for like a minute. I wasn't. I was just kind of paralyzed. And the next minute, the piece of food cleared, and she goes from not being able to grasp breath to looking like she's about to die, to looking at me, because we got eye contact at one point, and she looked like she was looking at me, knowing that she was going to die. And the first thing she did when the piece of food came back and she got her first breath, she looked around to see if anyone was watching, because she was so self-conscious.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not judging her for that. For me, that was the most disturbing piece of the entire thing. A little bit of shame and like, you lazy shit, why didn't you get up and run over and help her? And, why didn't you react, and all this other stuff, and all these temporary judgments, which we're brilliant at, by the way. But actually, I was profoundly moved. And I think the reason that it disturbed me actually so much, that her first inclination was to see if anyone spotted the disruption, the lack of composure, the messiness. Mm-hmm. And the reason that was so disturbing to me is I've spent so much time wondering and caring what people think. Everything hinged on an A. Well, I never got an A in my life. Everything hinged on getting a pass. Everything hinged on getting picked for the team. Everything hinged on getting, yes, you're good. Everything hinged on getting pocket money. Everything hinged on being, selected or in societal terms. Everything. Yeah. We set our kids up for just, they're either in or they're out. And we're so conditioned to seek acceptance that we would rather deny the essence of who we are, what we're here to do, the things that we want to do, and we would substitute those for temporary gratifications of people that in the end really don't matter in some cases. Mm-hmm. And in some cases, they matter too much. Mm-hmm. Their opinions of us. And we go out into the world and we pick jobs. I often say to people, every story I've ever told, anything, any interview, any stage, I always tell a real story, like a real life story. This story I made up to illustrate a point is, Jack goes to play golf with his buddies, and he's on the fourth hole playing golf, and his buddies say, "Hey, what's Jack Jr. doing today?" He's doing whatever they do in Canada, whatever they do in the US, but he's deciding today what career path and what college he's going to. And they go, "Oh, what do you think he's going to do?" He says he can do whatever he wants. I mean, I've told him, I know you guys are into the kids should be accountants and doctors and whatever. I've told little Jack he can do whatever he wants. What happened that morning before he went to play golf is he met his son and he said, "Listen, son, you can do whatever you want." Now, I'm a lawyer and your grandfather was a lawyer. It'd be great if you were, but you do whatever you want. And I'll love you no matter what. And Jack Jr. is sitting there going, "So essentially what you're telling me, Dad, is, but you'd love me a little bit more if I was a lawyer." And we head off and become lawyers, and we end up being things, and we end up building entire empires in some cases, waiting for someone to turn around and say, "Hey, son, I'm proud of you." Mm-hmm. I've worked with soccer players at the highest level who are still seeking validation from a parent, and it's never going to come. I've worked with the Canadian Olympic team and gone to London at the Olympics and worked with athletes who were amazing human beings that were still seeking validation from their parents. And again, it's not wrong. It's just how quickly, and quickly is the wrong energy, but how soon can you stop and recognize the why behind something that you're doing so you can make some adjustments in your life. And telling yourself everything's a 9.5 when it may or may not be, that is not the answer.
Yeah.
If you're trying to sell yourself a 9.5 and you're trying to sell me or somebody else a 9.5, it tells me that it's not even close to a 9.5.
Yeah. Well, and this is the interesting thing is the judgment in our society is high. And I don't know if there's anybody out there that doesn't feel the pressure or the sting of that at times from an early age onwards. Mm. In our unconsciousness of scarcity, survival, all those, unconscious programs that are running so much of our behavior and we don't even know. And, when they say 95% of our DNA is junk DNA, or, it's like most of all of our behaviors are unconscious. How do we dive into that a little bit more and bring it to the consciousness? And I think part of it is some of what you just named is being aware of that. Yeah. And I've talked to thousands of patients too, where they have a similar thing where they tell, "I've never shared this with anybody." Mm. And they share it. And I'll say, "You're, the 10th person this week that told me something very similar." And I've often reflected back, if you were in a waiting room of all the patients I saw this week and you all actually shared with each other what you're thinking and feeling and believing about yourselves, you would realize that this is so common. You are not alone in how you feel at all. And I have felt that way. Yeah. And the reconnection of bringing us back to realizing that everybody walking down the street is likely feeling harsh judgment from the people around them, probably mostly themselves. Yeah. But that's really alive. And if we all acknowledged and realized that, the amount of sharing and real and raw connection, you said it, I think, beautiful, bold and dysfunctional or life. And I'm like, that's a pretty good mantra for life or whatever you had said there. I may have changed the words, but the humanness that we have, the humility it takes to be human, and also just, taking one step in front of the other, wearing red lenses or not, that it can still give the courage for others to, "Oh, hey, I saw that person step out. They got a podcast." And I think actually I resisted having my own podcast for a long time because I was worried about judgment or doing a good job or not, and saying I was too busy, and I am. And there's some of these layers of resistances. What is that going to be? Is it going to be as good as other people's podcasts? Yeah. Who am I to do a podcast? What am I going to say? Who am I going to have on? And I just want really deep, authentic human conversations. And I believe that's what we've been having this whole time, which is what I knew we would have because I've been able to witness you, not from a pedestal place. I probably did put you on a pedestal for a while, and I've done that to other people, and I apologize because that doesn't serve you or me or anybody. And I'm starting to learn that more in my own life because people are doing it to me, and I'm like, oh God, don't do that. I'm just a guy, and I have a mission, and I'm going to keep working on that, regardless of if it's messy or not. But I was stuck in my own judgment for a long time of the insecurity and overanalyzing things, and I wouldn't fucking do anything. I wouldn't take those steps. And so it feels like such a relief to take steps and get it wrong, apologize where needed, and, continue on. And so I feel like we're probably moving towards, time of wrapping up soon. This has been a profoundly beautiful conversation, and, I'll take it back to a few of these things and see if we can kind of bridge all this together, that, there's an inner child in all of us that probably got judged legitimately from a really early age. And some of us are still carrying that as adults. And I would invite people to look at that and feel into that. Do your best to get some people around you that love you enough to hopefully accurately reflect what's true and what's happening. And those are people that have likely done a lot of work on themselves. And I hate even saying that. It sounds cliche, but it's true. I'd like to think of another way, but I call it excavation. I've done a lot of gardening of self, and I always find stuff to continue to work on. And I'm, grateful for that, because each new layer that I uncover, even if it's uncomfortable, or even if I feel a lot of grief and shame of, oh my God, I've just now seen a new lens on past behaviors that I'm not proud of. It's hard to stomach or digest that sometimes, but I'm just going to chew on it one bite at a time. And I find each time I do that, I'm able to come back into the world in a new way, in a different way, as I'm doing that I don't actually have to complete some level of healing before I'll start doing something more. And so I'd love you to continue to follow everything you just shared. And I have no doubt you'll do anything that you authentically have coming through you. And is there anything else that feels guided to share, anything that wants to, move through, that you want to speak to for yourself or for others?
Yeah. There is something. It's a statement. It's a statement that I sometimes present to people and ask them to fill in the gap, if you like, or to finish the statement. And I think that we have these beliefs and stuff, which is all, a little bit more common. But I think that we have these ironclad stories, these declarations, these contracts with ourselves. Whether we've signed them or not, doesn't really matter. And I think sometimes emotionally we've actually signed them. And I often ask people to just finish the statement. But in the end of the day, and when you're in the right space, when you choose to be really honest with yourself, when you come from a place of courage, the finishing of that statement is often, but in the end of the day, I'm going to be on my own. But in the end of the day, I'm not good enough. But in the end of the day, I don't deserve this. But in the end of the day, I don't matter. And I think we have these really deeply held narratives around ourselves that simply don't serve us. There's no doubt they don't serve us. That's clear. And the other thing that's just coming up for me is that I think one of the greatest things that we can do in a relationship is when someone shares something that we don't agree with. I'm fat, I'm ugly, I'm this, I'm that. What if we just said, I hear you. It hurts me to hear you, perhaps. But I appreciate that's what you feel. I think there's so many times that someone shares something about themselves. And one of the greatest ways of dismissing what someone has just shared is by running over them, telling them they're not ugly, they're not fat, they're not this, they're not that. And yet, I think in the work I do, I believe that I actually create the space to help people name what it is that's going on for them, and then go, okay, you're ugly. Now, what are we going to do with that? And is that something you want to, hold on to? And how's that story serving you? Because it has a purpose. All of these negative stories, all of these negative dialogues, all of these negative beliefs that we have an upside, even though on the surface they don't look like they have. The upside is that you don't have to change. The upside is that you don't have to let them go. And I often would say to people, sometimes people pay thousands of dollars, travel thousands of miles to sit in front of me for the clarity that they don't actually want. And if you want to stir emotion in somebody, is get close to a shitty story that's not serving them, that's not even true, but they've been holding on for 10, 15, 20 years. And you get close to taking that story from them. And it's not my job to take it, just to be clear, but create an environment where they have the opportunity to let that story go, that negative, deeply, deeply negative signed declaration of themselves that's holding them back from humanity, and watch how they grip. There's a lot of science, or recently science, about grip strength is connected to longevity. I have no idea about the results of that or the truth of that. But I think sometimes people develop a sense of grip and strength that they didn't even know they had. But it's like, don't you fucking touch my story, because that has served me for so long, but it is not going to serve you moving forward. Mm-hmm. And if I could impart one thing, and I don't mean, it's not like a wisdom, I'm not even sure how I'm going to say this, but the thing that has served me the most in this world is two things. It really comes down to one thing, is that it's actually not about me. It's not about me. But when I sit in front of people and they say, but I want to become a speaker, I want to become a podcast host, I want to be this, I want to do what you do, I want to be on stage, I want to speak, I want to be a keynote speaker, I want to be this. So what are some of the problems? Well, I'm afraid I'm going to this. I'm afraid I will fail. I don't think I'm good enough. Do you see all the I's? The I, the me, it just permeates everything. And I think one of the greatest opportunities on earth is to get away from the I and to start looking at the impact you can make. And I'm going to leave people with an exercise that I'm not going to apologize for. And one thing, I'm not telling people what I think purpose is for them, but I think one of the greatest lived experiences for any human being in terms of purpose is to alleviate suffering for other people in the world. Whether it's 1 or 1 million, those details should not matter. And people might go, well, what does that mean? You mean just go and work in a camp or go and work with somebody who's going through something bad? Or yeah, that's one thing you could do. Go and work in an orphanage, do whatever it happens to be. Or you can actually do it through the lens of a lived experience. In other words, alleviate suffering for one other person at least in your life through something that you yourself have suffered from. And that alignment is unlike anything I've ever experienced in this world. So for me, it was loneliness. And my mission, if you want to call it, and my journey is to alleviate it and to eliminate loneliness for as many people as I can before I die. And how I do that is through the work I do. And when you start to look at life through that, and the exercise is really simple, just get a blank piece of paper and draw a girl, draw a boy, draw a man, draw a woman. Give them a handbag, give them a pair of sunglasses, give them a hat, give them curly hair, give them bushy eyebrows, give them whatever, and feel into the pain that they're in. And then name them. Josh, Henry, Kevin, Philip, Mary, Sarah, whatever. And feel into the pain and the suffering that they are experiencing. And what most likely would happen is you will actually experience and relive some of the pain you yourself have experienced through the lens of this drawing in front of you. And the question is very simple as this, and it sounds kind of judgy and it sounds kind of heavy, but it's the only way I know how to describe it is, are you willing to abandon that person or not? And when I look at that drawing and I think about podcasting, I have no fear whatsoever because it's not about me. It's about helping Peggy, who lives in Yellowknife. I don't know why she lives in Yellowknife, but my little picture does. That's who Peggy is. She may or may not be real to other people. She may not exist in the way that people might think, but she exists in terms of the pain she's in. And when I think about her, that's the inspiration I get. And we just lost somebody in our family very recently. And what I do in time is I do my best to create space to mourn. I remember some of the coolest times we've had. And they may be few, but I do my best to remember them. And then I always say, what am I going to do in honor of them? Because again, that's getting me out of my own way. And people might say, that's very selfish use of someone else's death. No. As long as the intention is to create a space where people suffer less in the world, what better way to honor them? Mm-hmm. So screw it, I'll make a declaration right now. And it's not one that I want to be accountable for. It's not one that I'm going to give you a date for. But I'm going to do a podcast and I'm going to honor it. And it's going to be inspired by Liam Begley.
Yeah. Well, I think we all feel honored by hearing a human being share what's real. And what a way to honor each other is to, show up in our humanness, how we feel, the realness, the messiness, any of those things. And, for everybody, every human has lost somebody or something. And there's a way to bring that forward and use that energy in, in a force for good on this planet, and to use it as fuel for inspiration and however somebody feels inspired. Mm. And I really feel honored for everything that you shared today, and for us sharing space and just allowing whatever needed to be shared through us. And a quote that comes to mind through the Gene Keys, Richard Rudd is the author, that wisdom is in the not knowing. When we let go of needing to know, wisdom is right there waiting to come through. And it's something that I've been doing my best to allow in my life in whatever shape and form it wants to take. And I feel like it's similar to getting out of the way and just let that energy come through in a powerful way. We don't know what's going to happen, but there's beauty in that. And so thank you, Phillip.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.